I was surrounded by enemy soldiers. There were so many of them. I did something most people wouldn't have done in my situation, because it was only a matter of time before they found me. All my men were down, lying on the ground. I was the only one left from this mission, and there was no way I could let myself get captured. Near me was an enemy soldier I had taken down, and I had to think fast. I switched uniforms with him and waited to be rescued as a wounded soldier. That was the only way I could make it out alive.
What would you do if you were surrounded on all sides by German soldiers? This is the story of Theo, a French soldier who did the unimaginable to survive and found something he never expected. You will cry, smile, and love this story. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video.
My name is Jean-Pierre Delacroix, a French resistance soldier, and this is the story of how the war changed me, destroyed me, and also gave me the most precious thing in my life. It was the winter of 1943. The gray sky seemed to reflect the hopelessness spreading across occupied Europe. I joined the resistance 2 years prior, after the Germans took Paris. My father was executed in public for refusing to hand over our bakery to supply German troops. My mother died of grief 3 months later. Only my younger sister, Amélie, and I were left. That morning, we were called for a mission of extreme importance: to destroy a fuel refinery supplying German tanks and aircraft. Without it, the enemy offensive in the region would be paralyzed for at least 3 weeks. There were 10 of us, all with empty stares, visible and invisible scars. Soldiers who had seen too much, lost too much. We planned the entire mission meticulously to ensure nothing went wrong. We crawled through the frozen woods surrounding the German refinery. We got close to the site and spotted 2 German guards on watch. I gave the agreed-upon signal, 3 short clicks with a small flashlight covered by a red cloth, and we advanced in perfect synchronization. The first guards were neutralized silently. Quick knives, necks broken with precise movements. No shots fired, yet. Stealthily, we managed to get inside. Since we'd already studied the refinery, we knew exactly where we were and where the explosives needed to be placed. In seconds, the alarm blared. Powerful lights illuminated the yard, and German voices shouted orders in every direction. 3 other soldiers and I went to place the explosives, while the rest of the group provided cover. We were fast, and in 5 minutes all the explosives were set. We quickly got out of the refinery. We were running through the forest when the first explosion lit up the night sky like an evil sun. The roar was so powerful that I felt the pressure in my chest, even from a distance. Our escape route led us up a steep hill. I stayed behind, making sure no one followed us, while my buddies climbed. From my position, I watched everything unfold like a slow-motion nightmare. We were surprised. As they ascended the hill, dozens of German soldiers emerged from the darkness and began taking down the soldiers one by one. The massacre was quick and brutal. I watched, helpless, unable to do anything. I was near the refinery, in the middle of some bushes. I was alone, crouched behind a dense bush, just a few yards from where the refinery still blazed with infernal flames. I saw groups of German soldiers descending toward the destroyed base, searching the area for survivors or saboteurs. It was only a matter of time before they found me. My mind raced. The options were limited and equally terrible. Surrendering would mean torture followed by execution. Everyone in the resistance knew the horrors the Germans reserved for captured saboteurs. Fighting to the end would be heroic but pointless. I'd die quickly, maybe taking 2 or 3 of them with me. That's when I remembered Amélie's face, my orphan sister, and the hug we shared before I left. "You promise you'll come back to take care of me?" I had made a promise. The solution came to me when I noticed a dead German soldier a few meters away. He was taller and more corpulent than I, but that could work in my favor. Loose clothing would seem like the result of weight loss after an injury. I silently crawled to the body, constantly checking for any enemies nearby. With hands trembling from adrenaline, I began to strip him, removing his blood-soaked uniform. The man had a bullet wound in his abdomen. I could use that. I changed clothes quickly, feeling the damp, sticky fabric of the blood against my skin. It was a repulsive sensation, but one that could save my life. I needed to make it convincing, though. It wasn't enough to just wear the uniform. I needed to look like a wounded German soldier. With determination born of desperation, I picked up a sharp stone and repeatedly hit the area of my abdomen where the uniform was torn by the original shot. The pain was intense, but bearable compared to the alternative. When the area was sufficiently bruised, I took my knife and made a superficial cut just deep enough to bleed convincingly. The final touch was to gather shrapnel from the ground, twisted metal fragments from the explosion, and press them against the wound. The pain almost made me pass out, but I bit down hard on a piece of iron to remain conscious. The result was painful but convincing. A German soldier wounded by the explosion. I lay among the rubble and waited, controlling my breathing to appear semi-conscious and in shock. It wasn't long before I heard boots approaching, agitated voices shouting in German. "Hier, ein Überlebender!" I felt hands turning me over, examining my wound. I kept my eyes half closed, groaning in pain, which didn't require much acting effort, considering what I had just done to myself. "Lebt noch! Bringt ihn zum Sanitäter!" I was carried on a makeshift stretcher. As they took me away, I saw the flames consuming the refinery. Bodies scattered on the ground, Germans and French. Somewhere on that hill were my comrades, men with whom I had shared trenches, scarce food, and stories of better times. And I, the sole survivor, was being taken by the enemy, wearing their clothes, about to infiltrate their world. What I didn't know was that this would be just the beginning of my journey into the heart of Germany in the midst of war. And that, paradoxically, it would be in the enemy's homeland that I would find some purpose beyond the war. The hours following my capture are a succession of fragmented images enveloped in a fog of pain and delirium. I remember the swaying of the makeshift stretcher, the night sky lit by the orange glow of the burning refinery. German voices reverberated around me, sometimes distant, sometimes deafeningly close. I was taken to a field infirmary. The smell of iodine and ether permeated my nostrils, mixing with the metallic scent of blood. Unknown hands examined my wound, cleaning it. The pain was real, searing. The military doctor extracted the shrapnel I had inserted myself, muttering something about my luck in surviving. "Wer ist er? Haben Sie seine Erkennungsmarke gefunden?" "Who is he? Did you find his dog tag?" "Nein, Herr Oberleutnant, keine Papiere, keine Erkennungsmarke." This was my first great stroke of luck, and my first big problem. Without identification, I was a phantom. But it also meant they would need to find out who I was. When the officer approached to interrogate me, I made the most important decision since putting on that blood-soaked uniform. I faked a severe panic attack. I began to tremble uncontrollably, to cry and scream incomprehensible words. My body contorted on the stretcher as I hit my fists against my own head. "Shell shock," the doctor diagnosed. "He probably doesn't even remember his own name." War trauma, a condition I had seen many times in the empty eyes of veteran soldiers. A condition that simultaneously evoked pity and discomfort, and, crucially, discouraged prolonged interrogations. For 2 weeks, I maintained my charade in the military infirmary. Each time an officer tried to question me, I'd go into a crisis. I had developed a technique to make my eyes roll back, to produce foam at the corners of my mouth by subtly biting the inside of my cheeks. I learned to recognize by their tone of voice when they were frustrated or when they were starting to suspect, adjusting the intensity of my reactions. At night, when they believed I was sleeping under the effect of sedatives, I sharpened my ears to catch conversations, learning German words and expressions. My prior knowledge of the language was basic, enough to understand essential orders and information in captured documents. Now, immersed in the language 24 hours a day, I absorbed it like a thirsty sponge. After a month, the doctors concluded that I was physically recovered, but mentally incapacitated to return to the front. The hospital's administrative officer advocated for me to be sent to an asylum for mentally affected veterans in Germany itself. With all due respect, Herr Doctor, another officer argued, we cannot waste valuable resources on a soldier who will probably never serve the Reich again. The hospitals are full, the supply trains overloaded. It was then that a man entered the room who would change my destiny. Tall, with a bearing that inspired natural authority, but also a kindness in his eyes that seemed out of place amidst that war. Lieutenant Otto von Kleist, he introduced himself. I heard about this case while visiting our wounded. If you'll permit me, I have a proposal. The lieutenant explained that his family owned a rural property in Dresden, managed by his mother and sister, while his father and he served in the Wehrmacht. They could host a wounded soldier, allowing him to recover in a quiet environment, far from the horrors of the front. Furthermore, he added, they need male help for the heavier work on the property. Even a man in a compromised state could be useful for simple tasks. The officers present quickly agreed. It was a solution that relieved them of a problem without consuming military resources. Within days, I was on a train heading to the heart of Germany, accompanied by Lieutenant von Kleist. During the journey, I maintained my pretense of psychological trauma, but observed everything intently. The lieutenant tried a few times to establish communication, speaking slowly, as if talking to a child. He told me about Dresden, about his family, about what life was like before the war. His tone was not one of superiority or disdain, like that of the other officers, but of genuine compassion. This left me deeply uncomfortable. It was easier to hate a cruel and arrogant enemy than to recognize humanity in those we considered monsters. Every kind word from Lieutenant von Kleist was like a small fissure in the wall of certainties I had built about this war. Dresden was a sight from another world, a city of Baroque elegance that seemed to have miraculously escaped the horrors ravaging Europe. Of course, there were signs of war everywhere. Propaganda posters, rationing, women doing traditionally male jobs. But the architectural beauty remained intact, reminding me of what France was like before the occupation. At the small railway station on the outskirts of the city, we were received like heroes. Flags, flowers, children chanting patriotic songs. The lieutenant, clearly embarrassed by the attention, waved politely. I noticed his gaze anxiously searching among the crowd. That's when I saw her for the first time. She stood out among everyone like the first star of twilight. Her golden hair was tied in a simple braid, and her eyes were a deep blue like mountain lakes. She wore no makeup, nor did she need it. There was a natural beauty in her features that no artifice could enhance. "Marie!" the lieutenant exclaimed, breaking into a smile that completely transformed his military demeanor. "Marie!" the lieutenant exclaimed. They embraced with the intimacy of those who share blood and memories. Brother and sister, I understood immediately. There was a subtle resemblance in their features, their posture, the way both slightly tilted their heads when speaking. Marie turned her eyes to me, curious, compassionate. I felt a strange discomfort under that gaze, as if she could see through my charade with a single look. I lowered my head, intensifying the trembling in my hands to reinforce my role. "This is Hans," the lieutenant explained in German. "We don't know his last name or unit. He lost his speech due to severe trauma. The doctors believe that the country air and a quiet routine might help him recover." Marie approached me cautiously, like one approaching a wounded animal. She extended her hand in a gesture of welcome. I hesitated for a moment, then shook it briefly, keeping my eyes down. Her skin was soft, but I noticed calluses on her palms, hands that knew hard work, despite their delicacy. "Welcome to our home, Hans," she said. "I hope you find peace with us." The von Kleist property was 20 minutes from the station, a modest but well-maintained farm. The main house was a solid two-story building with large windows and a steep roof typical of the region. Around it, cultivated fields stretched to a small forest that bordered the property. I was settled in a room at the back of the barn, simple but clean and comfortable. A narrow bed, a rustic table, a small cupboard. Through the window, the entire expanse of the property was visible, and in the distance, the city's towers. The family consisted, besides the lieutenant and Marie, of their mother, Frau Clara von Kleist, an austere woman whose eyes carried the weight of constant worries, and a younger brother, Friedrich, a boy of about 12 years old, with the energy and curiosity typical of his age, despite the war. I soon discovered that the patriarch, General Friedrich von Kleist Sr., was missing in action in the North African campaign. His portrait dominated the living room, an imposing man in dress uniform, with the same piercing blue eyes that Marie had inherited. The tension was palpable during the welcome dinner for the lieutenant. Otto would leave the next morning. His leave was brief, just enough to bring me and visit the family. His mother barely touched her food, directing glances at her son that mixed pride and terror at the impending separation. Marie maintained a facade of strength, but I noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she served the soup. Little Friedrich bombarded his brother with questions about tanks, planes, and battles, questions Otto answered with gentle evasions, clearly trying to spare the family the horrors he had witnessed. As for me, sitting in a secluded corner of the table, I observed everything with downcast but attentive eyes. Every word exchanged, every gesture, every silence laden with meaning, everything was valuable information for my survival. Frau Clara cast suspicious glances at me occasionally. From the beginning, I felt she didn't approve of my presence. I didn't blame her. What mother would want a disturbed stranger in her home, especially in such uncertain times? The next morning, I witnessed the family's farewell. Otto, again in his impeccable uniform, embraced his mother at length. She held back her tears with the stoic dignity of German women, but her voice faltered as she said, "Come back to us, my son." Friedrich received a ruffle of his hair and a promise of better stories on the next visit. Marie was the last to say goodbye, hugging her brother tightly. When they parted, Otto held her by the shoulders and looked into her eyes. "Take care of everyone for me, little sister," he requested. Then, to my surprise, he turned in my direction. He approached where I stood, at a respectful distance. "Hans," he said, in clear, paused German, "take care of my family as if they were your own. It is the duty of a soldier of the Reich to protect our women and children, even when he can no longer fight in the trenches." Something in his gaze completely disarmed me. There was no condescension, only sincere trust. I swallowed hard, feeling an unexpected wave of guilt. I nodded slightly, the most communication my role allowed. Otto gave a formal salute, not to his family, but to me, a gesture of respect from soldier to soldier. Then he left, his tall, erect figure diminishing in the distance on the path leading to the station. At that moment, a terrible realization fell upon me like a leaden cloak. I wasn't just deceiving abstract enemies. I was betraying the trust of real people, who had welcomed me into their home, who had shared their scarce bread with me in times of rationing. For the first time since I put on that German uniform, I questioned not only my strategy, but my own humanity. The following days established my routine on the property. Despite my supposed mental state, I showed willingness for physical labor, cutting wood, mending fences, helping with the harvest. The work kept my mind occupied and justified my appetite, which was greater than that of many Germans under rationing. Friedrich was assigned as my supervisor, a task the boy performed with comical seriousness, explaining simple tasks with exaggerated gestures, as if I were completely incapable of comprehension. It was difficult not to smile at his enthusiasm, but I maintained my empty expression, my eyes distant. Frau Clara remained aloof, managing the house and overseeing the regular dispatch of a portion of the produce to the war effort. At night, I would hear her discuss in hushed tones with Marie, questioning the wisdom of keeping a demented man under their roof. What if he has a violent outburst during the night? What if he hurts Friedrich? She argued. Mother, he is a wounded soldier who served the Reich. It is our patriotic duty to help him, Marie responded firmly. Besides, we need someone for the heavy work. Friedrich is still a boy. And Marie was a constant enigma. Unlike her mother, she seemed genuinely interested in my well-being. She would bring me fresh water when I worked under the sun and occasionally sit near me during meals, trying to establish some form of communication. Initially, I responded only with minimal gestures, fearful that any prolonged interaction might betray my disguise. But as the days passed, I allowed myself small concessions, a more emphatic nod, a gaze held for a few seconds longer. It was she who began to teach me rudimentary sign language. She would point to objects, say their names in German, then make a corresponding gesture. Bread, water, tool, basic words a mute would need to communicate. I feigned difficulty in learning, but I absorbed every lesson avidly. Not just to perfect my German, but because those moments with Marie were small oases of near normalcy in my existence of lies. It was dangerous, I knew. Every minute in her presence increased the risk of a slip-up. But there was something in the way she treated everyone, with firm kindness, without self-pity despite the circumstances, that inexplicably drew me to her. Marie had taken it upon herself to cure my mutism. We would sit together in the faint light of a lantern in the barn, away from Frau Clara's reproving glances. She would show me simple drawings, try to teach me to form words with my lips, tell stories of the region as if speaking to a child. I feigned minimal progress, an occasional nod of recognition, a deliberately failed attempt to pronounce a word. Enough to keep her hopeful, but not so much that it would raise suspicions about my rapid learning. The truth is, I could spend hours just observing her. The way the golden light of the lantern reflected in her hair, how her eyes narrowed slightly when she smiled, how her hands, delicate despite the calluses from daily work, gestured as she enthusiastically explained something. At some point, I can't pinpoint when, the charade began to weigh on me like lead. Every smile I couldn't return with words, every question I pretended not to understand, was a small death. I had infiltrated as an enemy, but now I felt like a traitor to her trust. One December afternoon, we were working together in the barn, storing provisions for the winter. Rationing was becoming more severe each week, and Marie had the idea of creating a secret compartment under the floor to hide part of the harvest, not out of selfishness, but to ensure that Friedrich, still growing, wouldn't go hungry in the harshest months. We began to work more closely. Our fingers occasionally touched as we passed tools to each other. Sometimes I'd catch her observing me when she thought I wasn't looking. I did the same. It was a silent dance, dangerous, inevitable. One afternoon, while cutting wood, we took some to be hidden in the secret shed. The cart creaking under the weight of the wood was the only sound besides our breaths. Inside the dark shed, light only entered through small cracks between the planks. We began to pass the logs into the hiding place. Our hands touched more frequently now, and each touch seemed to last a little longer than necessary. I don't know who took the first step. Perhaps it was me, holding her arm as she turned to grab another log. Perhaps it was her, deliberately stopping too close. All I know is that suddenly we were staring at each other, breaths suspended, and then kissing as if the world was ending. And in a way, it was. That kiss changed everything. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like an imposter, a spy, a liar. I felt like just a man in love with a woman. The taste of her lips was sweet, with a hint of salt from tears I didn't realize had begun to fall. Mine or hers, I couldn't say. I had never felt what I felt before. When we kissed, the chemistry between us was something I couldn't describe with words. Time stopped in that moment, and nothing else mattered. The war no longer mattered, nor did where I was or who I was with. The only thing that mattered was the present. I don't know how long we stood there kissing, as my hand moved down, exploring her body, and I felt her breath become more labored. She pulled away abruptly, eyes wide as if waking from a dream. Without a word, she ran out of the barn, leaving me alone with my heart pounding in my chest and the terrible certainty that I had made a fatal mistake. That night, lying in my narrow bed, I heard the room door open. It was Marie. She stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the faint moonlight. She said nothing, just slowly advanced until she sat on the edge of my bed. Her eyes gleamed in the darkness, moist with unshed tears. "This is madness," she whispered in German. "If my mother finds out—" She didn't complete the sentence. She didn't need to. We both knew the possible consequences. But when I touched her face, all rational thought seemed to dissolve. That night, we forgot the war, the lies, the differences that separated us. We were just two young people finding comfort and passion in each other's arms. She began to come every night, stolen moments of happiness amidst the chaos. Lying in the darkness, I held her against my chest, feeling her warmth, her scent of homemade soap and field herbs. I never spoke, I couldn't speak, but I let my body communicate what my words could not. We communicated through touches, glances, gestures. We created our own silent language, an intimate code that only we understood. In some moments, I almost forgot I was Jean-Pierre Delacroix, a French resistance soldier, and not Hans, the mute German soldier. As the weeks passed, our nightly encounters grew more intimate, more profound. My room was our secret refuge from the warring world outside. It witnessed our complete surrender to each other. It was wrong, it was dangerous, but in those moments, the war ceased to exist. We were just a man and a woman, finding comfort amidst the chaos. January arrived with heavy snow and increasingly alarming news on the radio. Allied forces were advancing on several fronts, and the optimistic tone of German propaganda began to sound desperate. Friedrich absorbed every word, speaking with childish fervor about the final victory, while Frau Clara merely pressed her lips into a thin line, her eyes betraying fear for the fate of her elder son. One particularly cold night, Marie came to the room later than usual. Her face was pale, and there was a tremor in her hands when she extended them to take mine. "Hans," she whispered, guiding my hand to her belly, "life is growing here, our life." The world seemed to stop for an instant. I looked at her, incredulous, a storm of contradictory emotions exploding in my chest: joy, terror, crushing guilt. I was going to be a father, a child born of true love and a monstrous lie. That night I didn't sleep. As Marie rested in my arms, her body warming mine against the unrelenting cold, my mind swirled with tormented thoughts. What future could I offer this woman and the child she carried? The war was far from over. I was an impostor living among enemies. If discovered, I would be executed as a spy. And Marie, what would happen to her when she discovered she had fallen in love with a lie? That she had given her heart and her body to a man who didn't even know his true name? For the first time since I infiltrated that house, I seriously considered revealing my identity. Perhaps Marie would understand. Maybe we could flee together, find some neutral place to raise our child away from the conflict. Romantic, naive ideas. The reality was far crueler. In the following weeks, the weight of the secret became almost unbearable. Marie noticed my uneasiness, attributing it to the natural anxiety of a future father in uncertain times. I tried to focus on the present, on the daily work, on the precious moments with her. But the shadow of the lie hung over everything. It was on a March morning that everything fell apart. I was sleeping soundly after a restless night, tormented by nightmares. In the dream, I was trapped in a dark cell, while Marie watched me from the other side of the bars, holding our child in her arms, her eyes filled with contempt. "Marie," I cried in my nightmare, "don't go. Forgive me." The words that escaped my lips were not in German. They were in French. My mother tongue revealing itself at the most vulnerable moment. I woke to find Marie sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at me with an undescribable expression. A mix of confusion, shock, and, worst of all, the first seed of understanding. "You spoke," she said in a low voice, "in French." I tried to compose myself, to feign confusion, to maintain my charade until the end, but the damage was done. A tiny crack in the edifice of lies I had built with such care. In the following days, I felt Marie's gaze on me, more attentive, more analytical. The unspoken questions in her eyes haunted me. She still came to the barn at night. We still loved each other, but something fundamental had changed. Fate, however, has its own plans. One spring morning, we were awakened by the sound of engines. A German military convoy was approaching the farm, raising dust on the rural road. My heart stopped. Somehow they had found out. Perhaps someone from the town had heard my French during the nightmare. Perhaps Frau Clara, with her maternal intuition, had finally connected the dots. The soldiers were not gentle. They dragged me from the bed, pulled me outside. Marie screamed, trying to stop them, but was brutally restrained. I saw Frau Clara in the distance, her face a mask of shock and something else. Guilt? Had she been the one to denounce me? They threw me into the back of a truck like a sack of potatoes. The officer commanding the operation offered no explanations to the family. He just said, in clear, cold German, that I was being taken for interrogation. I was taken to an old administrative building on the outskirts of Dresden. I was led to a damp basement where the interrogation began immediately. Not the refined type, with subtle questions and psychological manipulation. The brutal, direct type, with fists and batons. I maintained my pretense, groaning incoherently when struck, looking with an empty expression at my torturers. I had trained for this, prepared my body and mind to resist. But there was a limit to all human resistance. On the third day, or was it the fourth, the cell door opened to reveal not only my usual torturers, but the German officer, accompanied by a figure that made my blood run cold. The French have a reputation for being gentlemen, the officer continued calmly. Let's see if that's true. I will never forget the moment they dragged her into that room. Her face was streaked with tears, her dress partially torn. The small curve of her pregnancy was now clearly visible beneath the thin fabric. Her eyes, when they met mine, were full of confusion, fear, and something that broke my heart. Hope. Hope that I could somehow save her. The officer grabbed her hair, pulling her head back. "This is your last chance," he said coldly. "Confess who you are, or we'll start having fun with your German whore." They threw her to the floor. A soldier tore more of her dress, exposing her pale shoulder. I saw her eyes close in anticipated terror, and something inside me broke. "Stop!" I cried in perfect German. "I confess. I am a French soldier. I will do what you want. Just don't hurt her." Something inside me broke. It wasn't just my life at stake now. It was Marie. It was our unborn child. It was a different kind of promise, not made with words, but with every touch, every look, every moment shared in that barn. "Stop," I said, in perfect German. Not the rudimentary German of a common soldier, but the fluent German I had absorbed during months of complete immersion. "She knows nothing. Let her go." The silence that followed was absolute. Then the officer smiled, an expression that never reached his cold eyes. "Finally," he said, "the truth begins to emerge." I confessed everything, my real identity, the mission to destroy the refinery, how I survived by assuming the identity of a dead German soldier. I no longer tried to protect myself, only her. Marie listened to everything, her face a mask of horror and betrayal. When I finished, our gazes met across the room. There were no more tears in her eyes, just a desolating emptiness that hit me harder than any physical blow. "Jean," she whispered, testing my true name. "Our whole life together was a lie." She slowly stood up, adjusting the torn remnants of her dress with surprising dignity. Marie then said the most horrible words a person could hear. They were the last words I heard from her before they took her away. I no longer fought against the blows that followed. The physical pain was almost welcome, a distraction from the devastating emptiness Marie had left behind. The days in the cell merged into a fog of pain and semi-consciousness. I learned later that I had been condemned to death as a spy, but the execution was postponed so they could extract more information about the French resistance. A cruel irony. My prolonged suffering, perhaps the only thing keeping Marie and our son safe, since I still had value as a source of information. Food was scarce, just enough to keep me alive. Water, often contaminated. The interrogation sessions continued, but with less intensity. My value decreased as the information I possessed became obsolete. It was during this dark period that I noticed a pattern. One of the guards, younger than the others, always placed the food plate near the bars instead of rudely shoving it inside like the others. Once, I found a small piece of paper under the bowl of watery soup. A single sentence. "We are from the resistance. Wait patiently. We will get you out of here." Hope is dangerous in a cell. It can keep a man alive or drive him completely mad. I clung to that promise like a shipwreck survivor to wreckage, counting the days with invisible marks on the wall of my mind. 2 weeks after the note, I felt the ground tremble slightly beneath the floor of the filthy cell. At first, I thought it was another feverish delusion, but the trembling continued, rhythmic, deliberate. I dragged myself to the corner farthest from the door and began to push away the straw. The stone floor had been undermined from below. A loose stone revealed a narrow hole, barely enough for a man to pass through. A rope was pushed through the opening, along with instructions whispered in French. I descended through the tunnel, atrophied muscles protesting with every movement. The tunnel was claustrophobically narrow, forcing me to crawl like a snake. Every inch was a battle against panic and exhaustion. I emerged in a dark alley where men awaited me. They had a disguise for me to wear. Without words, we followed deserted streets, avoiding patrols, until we reached an abandoned house where 5 unknown faces awaited me. The German resistance, unlikely allies who risked their lives to save those of foreigners like me. The following months were all about physical recovery and working with the underground network. My knowledge of German language and procedures proved invaluable. I became a key player in intelligence operations, helping to intercept and decode messages, pinpoint strategic targets, and plan escape routes for Allied prisoners. But in every spare moment, my thoughts kept going back to Marie and our child. Was she safe? Had she given birth? Boy or girl? These questions tormented me during the long, sleepless nights. The war was winding down. German cities, once symbols of order and power, were being reduced to rubble under Allied bombings. Dresden, with all its Baroque beauty, was devastated in February 1945, a real inferno of fire that swallowed up a huge part of the historic city. When the news about the bombing hit, I felt like my own heart had been turned to ashes. The von Kleist property was on the outskirts, but still within the destruction zone. I begged my contacts for any info on survivors from that area. The news was patchy and chaotic. Lists of refugees, injured folks in makeshift hospitals, identified dead. For weeks I scoured every list, every rumor, until one name just jumped out at me. Marie von Kleist, transferred to the refugee camp in Chemnitz. Alive. She was alive. The German surrender in May 1945 brought the organized chaos of the occupation forces. Taking advantage of the administrative confusion, I managed to obtain authorization to visit the refugee camps, ostensibly to identify German collaborators among the displaced. The camp in Chemnitz was a city of tents and makeshift barracks. Lines of exhausted people waited for rations, for news of relatives, for any indication of where they would go next. Thin children played in the mud, oblivious to their country's defeat, just happy not to hear air raid sirens anymore. It was among these children that I saw a baby of about 3 months in the arms of a woman sitting alone in a corner of the camp. Her golden hair was shorter, her face thinner. Her eyes that once reflected mountain lakes now looked like deep wells of suffering. But it was her, Marie. She was different, thinner, her face marked by lines of concern that hadn't existed before. Her eyes, those same blue eyes that enchanted me on the first day, were now dull, hardened by war and suffering. In her arms, wrapped in blankets, was a small bundle that moved slightly. For an endless moment, we just stared at each other in silence. Time seemed to have frozen. So many emotions crossed her face, surprise, fear, anger, confusion, that it was impossible to determine which would prevail. "You," she finally said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here? Did you come to finish what you started? To destroy what's left of my family?" Her words hit me like bullets. I slowly put away my weapon and raised my hands, showing I posed no danger. "I came looking for you," I replied, my voice choked. "I needed to know if you were alive. If our child—" "Our child?" she interrupted, her voice rising an octave. "You have no child. A liar, a spy, an enemy has no right to call this child his." The baby began to cry, disturbed by its mother's altered tone. Marie immediately changed her posture, gently rocking the child, whispering words of comfort in German. I watched the scene, mesmerized. My child, my blood. So close and yet so distant. Marie, I tried again, keeping my voice low. I know you hate me. You have every right. I lied to you, to your family, but not about what I felt, never about that. She raised her eyes to me, and I saw tears glistening at the edges. How can I believe anything you say? Everything was a lie. Even your silence was a lie. I approached slowly, like one approaching a wounded and frightened animal. War puts us in impossible situations. I did what I had to do to survive, to be able to go home one day. And when I met you, when we fell in love, everything changed. You became my home. I'm with the resistance now, I explained, fighting to end this war, so that one day we can live in peace. You, me, and I looked at the baby, our child. Daughter, Marie corrected, almost without thinking. Your daughter. A daughter. I had a daughter. The emotion hit me like a wave, and I felt my eyes fill with tears. What's her name? Marie hesitated. For a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a soft voice, Esperanza. It means hope in Spanish. I read it in a book once. I thought it appropriate for times like these. Esperanza. Hope. A perfect name for an imperfect world. Looking at my daughter for the first time, my eyes filled with tears. I looked at Marie and said, I want to beg your forgiveness for all the lies I had to tell. I want you to forgive me. It was never my intention to deceive you and your family, but understand, I had to do it. I had to survive. The love I feel for you is real. I love you. If you ever truly loved me, if your feeling for me was sincere, I want you to forgive me. It doesn't matter if we are on opposite sides. What matters is what we feel for each other. Come with me to France. Let's start a new life. Let's be a real family. Me, you, and Esperanza, our daughter. We hugged and began to cry. Any feeling of anger she had before transformed back into love. My beautiful Marie was back. This was the woman I met when I arrived in Dresden, and the woman I fell in love with the first time I saw her. How I had missed her these past months. I never stopped thinking about her. If it's up to me, I never want to be separated from Marie again. It was on a spring afternoon in 1946, with Esperanza already walking and babbling words, that Marie finally opened her heart completely. I never truly hated you, she confessed, as we watched our daughter chasing butterflies in the garden of the small house we managed to get on the outskirts of Paris. When I found out who you were, I felt betrayed, yes, used. But then, I realized that I also always knew, somehow. A part of me always suspected you weren't who you said you were. I looked at her, surprised. What do you mean? Small things. The way you reacted when we talked about the war. How your eyes looked at me. Not with the hatred a German should have for the French, but with curiosity, with humanity. And that night, when you spoke French during the nightmare? I took her hand, feeling the soft skin that had so enchanted me during the days on the farm. Why didn't you say anything? Marie smiled, that smile that lit up her eyes in a way that made my heart race. Because I already loved you. And love sometimes makes us accept truths that reason would reject. The heart has reasons that reason itself does not know. Our journey didn't end there, of course. Life continued, with its challenges and joys. We had 4 more children after Esperanza: Jean, Claude, Sophie, and Clara, the latter in honor of Marie's mother, whom we never knew for certain if she survived the Dresden bombing. I kept my promise to my younger sister. I returned to take care of her and the rest of the family. But now I had my own family too, a legacy born from the ashes of the most devastating war humanity has ever known. In 1955, 10 years after the war ended, I took Marie and our kids to visit Dresden. The city had been rebuilt, though the scars were still visible if you knew where to look. We visited the spot where the auto farm used to be. A new building had been put up there, a young family living in the space where once fought, loved, and suffered. "Do you regret it?" Marie asked, as we watched Esperanza, now 11, running through the field that had once been her home. Everything that happened? I thought about the question for a long moment. I thought about the buddies I lost on the hill, the German soldier whose uniform I stole, the resistance missions, the lives taken and saved, the bombing of Dresden, and the long journey to that moment. I finally replied, "I regret the war. I regret the pain, the fear, and the lies. But I don't regret finding you. I don't regret Esperanza. I don't regret us." Marie squeezed my hand. She didn't need to say anything else. Some truths are so profound that words would just diminish their meaning. The war taught us that the line between ally and enemy is thin as paper, that the labels we put on each other, French, German, spy, traitor, are meaningless compared to what truly matters: our shared humanity, our ability to love beyond borders, beyond hatred, beyond fear. As a soldier, I was trained to destroy. As a man, I learned to build. As a father, I understood that true victory isn't in the battles we win, but in the love we grow amidst devastation. The war ended 10 years ago, but its lessons stick with us. Every day, when I look at Marie, Esperanza, and our other children, I remember that even in the darkest hours, even when everything seems lost, there's always a chance for love. There's always room for redemption. There's always hope. And in this post-war world, with nations still healing their wounds, with memories that will never completely fade, and in this post-war world, with nations still healing their wounds, with memories that will never completely fade, this is the truth I carry with me. For some things, strength and weapons do get the job done. But for others, the most important ones, only love can truly win. And in the end, love won.